We will be continuing our look at the arguments for the existence of God, and we'll be looking at St. Anselm's ontological argument in a bit more detail. St. Anselm was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he lays out his ontological argument in his Proslogium, which tries to support the claim of Psalm 14. And that claim is that reason requires us to believe in God. So what exactly is this argument? What type of argument is it? First, it's a reductio ad absurdum argument. So it starts with some claim, and then we assume the claim is true or false. The goal is to try to show the opposite. You offer premises that are contradictions, then infer the opposite of the original claim. So in Anselm's case, we assume God does not exist. Then we offer premises that show some sort of contradiction. And then we assume the opposite of the claim, which God does exist. It's also an a priori argument. If you remember back the difference between the two, an a posteriori truth is a truth which requires sense experience in order to be known. This is the empirical evidence. Whereas a priori truths are truths known independent of sense experience. One can simply reflect on a concept to derive its truth. And lastly, of course, as its name suggests, it's an ontological argument. And that merely means that it deals with the nature and relations of being. So with all arguments, it's important to get definitions down. So what is Anselm's definition of God? His definition is, God is that which nothing greater can be thought. Think of all the good-making properties until there are no more good-making properties to have, and that being is God. So essentially God is the sum of all the good-making properties, such as being all loving, all powerful, all knowing, and so forth. So let's take a look at the argument. In his original work, Anselm doesn't have the argument structured in any formal sense of premises and conclusions. So I'm using the Alvin Plantinga's construction of this in his book God and Other Minds. Alvin Plantinga is a modern Christian philosopher. So premise 1, God exists in the understanding, but not in reality. This is the assumption for our reductio argument. Premise 2, existence in reality is greater than existence in the understanding alone. Premise 3, a being having all of God's properties plus existence in reality can be conceived. 4, a being having all God's properties plus existence in reality is greater than God, from premise 1 and premise 2. Here's the contradiction that the premises are trying to make. Premise 5, a being greater than God can be conceived, from premise 3 and premise 4. Premise 6, it is false that a being greater than God can be conceived, from the definition of God that we laid out earlier. Premise 7, hence it is false that God exists in the understanding but not in reality, from premise 1, 5, and 6. Premise 8, God exists in the understanding. And premise 9, hence God exists in reality, from premise 7 and premise 8. Now, the argument may seem valid at first glance, and it may seem sound, but there's something wrong with it. It seems valid, but it doesn't seem very compelling. And in fact, there are some criticisms that can be had of the argument. So the first criticism would lie under premise number 2. In some cases, real existence is better, but not others, such as a nuclear winter. It's better for a nuclear winter to have non-existence, for it not to be real, than for it to be real. Another criticism is the problem of definitions. And this really gets to the source of the whole problem of the argument. Definitions simply specify the conditions necessary for being a certain thing. It does not specify how many things exist. Definitions do not imply existence in any way. We have definitions of elves, pixies, hydras, but that does not imply that those things exist. So, and the third real main criticism is that it is invalid. So even if all the premises were true, the conclusion can be false. So take premise 4. It attempts to show a contradiction that the greatest conceivable being has only ideal existence. At best, this would merely show that when thinking of this being, one would have to suppose this being exists. One must think of God existing, but that does nothing to show that there is a being, the referent, out there that fits the conception, the meaning. Here's some questions to think of. Do you think St. Anselm's argument is compelling? Do you think the argument can overcome these criticisms? You can answer these questions or any other questions or comments you have in the comments section below. Next time, we'll be looking at a cosmological argument by St. Thomas Aquinas. We'll be looking specifically at number 2 and number 3 of his 5 ways in his book, Summa Theologica. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please rate, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.